I had some offcuts from the previous project that I worked on, and I had need of a small side table to go beside a lounge chair. I wanted to see what I could do with this piece because it had some nice figure in it and wasn't really suited to too many other things. But it was nice and wide, and it was a 12-quarter board, so resawing it and book matching the grain is a nice approach for this tabletop. When I first laid it out, I was thinking that I would book match it in the direction that you just saw, which turned out to be not really the best look. There was more contrast with the other face. And so what I'm doing here is book matching the inner section where the grain is a lot more complicated, made for a nicer connection. Because of the fact that I had to remove the knot, it doesn't match perfectly, but that's okay. I'm not intent on a perfect grain match here. The other thing that you'll notice is there's a kind of a chunk, a wedge out of it where the live edge tapers down. And I'll address that in a minute with the shape of the bottom of the tabletop. I was going about this whole build really on the basis of kind of see what I build as I build. I didn't have a plan in mind starting out. I just had a basic concept in my head. Normally I'm a little bit more intentional about my designs and plan them out pretty meticulously, but with this offcut, it let me kind of do things a little bit more on the fly. The legs are a good example of the way that the design kind of transitioned from my first inclination to the final piece. My first thought was to essentially have kind of a rectangular shaped leg that would attach right at the edge of the top, so right at the four corners. And then I would join them with dominoes. Was my initial thought, and shape it so that it flowed into the top. And so this is just kind of setting it together to do a quick eye on where I'd start, and then I'd shape and taper the legs down and kind of flow them into the top. Immediately didn't like that as soon as I kind of started to put it all together in my head. And so what I'm doing now is I'm cutting the legs down so that I can turn them and go for a little bit more of a straightforward turned leg, slightly tilted. I'm by no means a master turner. I'm a pretty novice turner. So really all I'm doing here is a simple tapered leg, and then needing to match it 3 more times. And doing that is just pretty straightforward process of marking spots on the legs, measuring those out, and then transferring those measurements from the initial leg to the other 3 legs, marking and measuring at each of the same spots. I tend to like fairly classic design in some ways. In others, I guess I'm really attracted to the kind of Maloof, Nouveau kind of organic forms. Here I'm turning the top of the leg using a tapering device. It's always fun to use that because it's like sharpening a huge pencil. Sanding down the legs and moving on to the top to the tapered holes in order to insert the legs. Haven't shaped the top. I'm drilling the holes for the tapers first. I'm using a tapering bit that I normally would use with the brace, but in this case I'm using it in the drill press and wasn't quite sure how well that would work out. Thought it might overheat it, but just nice slow pass and worked fine. At this point, I'm laying out the shape for the bottom of the tabletop. looking to essentially round it in both directions and taking off the bulk here on the table saw. The bandsaw would have also been possible, but it was just a little too tall for the bandsaw, and because it was such a shallow angle, it would have not quite worked. And since it was the table saw, I had to finish it off with the handsaw. And then it's really a lot of hand plane work to try and establish the curve here. First over the one direction, and then on the ends to get the second direction, and then essentially joining those two down the sides. A lot of work with the spoke shave here. It's a tool that I just really like using. It's good for creating specific shapes. And then a bit of work on the sander. At this point, I'm sanding down the bottom to kind of get a better sense of the finished form, but it's not quite to the level that I'm looking for the edge. So here I'm kind of pushing the curve a bit more so that I get a much thinner edge. Here I'm gluing up with hide glue. I like hide glue for anything that I think one day may need any kind of work or adjustment. Typically when I'm doing a lamination of some kind, like, gluing the top together, I'll use PVA glue, but joints, I tend to prefer hide glue as they're workable and reversible, and it's nice to work with. Cutting the ends of the legs off. It's always so satisfying to do this because it takes something from being a spiny porcupine to being, nice and smooth and flat. And then finishing that up with the hand plane. Leveling the legs here. Nothing too complicated, pretty simple trick. And checking for level. This is always such finicky work. And then at the end, once you get it perfectly level, floors are never level, so always frustrating. And then final sanding, taking the top down to, I think probably 320 is my guess. That's what I took this to. And then cleaning up the legs. And then the finish. This I'm using shellac, thin shellac. I like to do that in quite a few coats. I think I put on 6 or 7 coats of shellac here. I'm not really concerned about this being a heavily worked table. It's pretty much going to have, a book and maybe a cup of tea on a coaster. So not anything that I'm terribly worried about being a heavily worked finish. And then rub that down with some steel wool, and then a coat of paste wax, and call it a day. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch this from beginning to end. I really enjoyed working on this project. It was nice to not have to spend a lot of time in the design phase and just kind of work on the fly. That was a treat for me. If you enjoyed this, then consider liking, subscribing, and all that YouTube stuff. Otherwise, just have a great day and enjoy your life. Cheers.